Hi there, you are listening to the Guitar Speak podcast. My name is Matt Wakeling and this is the show I produce in Sydney, Australia, where I speak to leading guitarists and guitar figures from all around the world. Thank you so much for joining me. Now today we celebrate the 65th birthday of possibly the most iconic electric guitar of all time, very likely one of the most symbolic images of popular culture of the last 65 years as well, and that is, of course, the Fender Stratocaster. Now, to talk all things Strats today, we have some fantastic guests. We have Ian S. Port, who is a US best-selling author who's recently written a fantastic book, The Birth of Loud, Leo Fender Les Paul and the Guitar Pioneering Rivalry that Shaped Rock and Roll. We're also joined by two of Australia's finest Strat players, being Steve Edmonds and Phil Cebrano. It was a lot of fun putting together this episode, and we're going to hear about history, we're going to talk about iconic players and professionals on the road and their very own Strat stories. So let's jump straight in. Ian S. Port, welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's our great pleasure. I've just finished reading your fantastic book, The Birth of Loud, Leo Fender Les Paul and the Guitar Pioneering Rivalry that Shaped Rock and Roll. It was such a brilliant book and lots to talk about. But today, in this episode, we're really focusing on the Strat. Now, in your book, you detail that by around 1953, Leo Fender and his Telecaster is in full swing. Production is going out the door and he's struggling to keep up with demand. With all this great stuff going on for Fender after such a long slog getting the Tele up and running, why the Stratocaster? Why is he looking at a new guitar?
Well, I think a couple reasons. For the first real big reason, I think, is, Leo Fender's a perfectionist. He's always believes that there can be kind of a next step, an improvement on what he's done before. He's always, in tech speak today, they would call it iterating. He's always building the next thing. It didn't take a whole long time after the Telecaster came out before he started hearing from musicians about the problems with it. Like one of the problems that he heard from someone like Bill Carson, one of his early kind of musician guinea pig tester friends, was about the Telecaster's bridge and about how you couldn't really adjust the intonation exactly for each string. So Carson had problems tuning it precisely enough for the recording studios at the time. And the way Carson would tell it, he would go into a studio and the studio producer would say, hey, that guitar's not in tune and you can't really get it perfectly intonated enough to play with other instruments. So there was a problem with that. People were complaining about the Telecaster's thick corners, the hard corners on the back of the body, the way that they kind of can cut into your chest after a while. And, just in general, I think Leo knew that the Telecaster had been a great first effort. It had been a kind of proof of concept, but he knew that, he could come up with something better. And certainly after Gibson released the Les Paul in 1952, there was a real kind of urgency at Fender to kind of put out something that matched the Les Paul's kind of elegance and obvious, like, sort of fineness.
Okay, yeah. And how was it initially received?
So I think the Stratocaster was pretty much regarded from the start as being kind of wild and amazing. Certainly you had, obviously that incredible double cutaway shape, which of course had existed before with the precision bass, but which was still completely new for a lot of people, and very surprising. The contours, the shapes, the just general futuristic kind of quality of it. And then of course you had the amazing tremolo arm, which kind of sort of existed thanks to Paul Bigsby before then.
Yeah.
Not really been put on a mainstream guitar up to that point and like allowed people to do all kinds of cool effects. I think it was immediately sort of recognized as being a real breakthrough. And certainly, you saw people giving up Gibsons, leaving Telecasters and going to the Stratocaster.
You talk about Buddy Holly as being an early adopter and someone who really spread the popularity of the Strat. Can you talk about his influence?
Yeah, I think it's sort of hard to overstate. Certainly Buddy Holly was not the only first adopter of the Strat, but he was a huge figure just in terms of like getting the Stratocaster on television in the United States, in the UK, in a rock and roll context. And I think he was really the first rock and roller to appear on mainstream television playing a Stratocaster. And here you have this guy, he's kind of tall, he's kind of good looking, but he's a little nerdy. He's got these glasses. He seems much more kind of mellow and more relatable, let's say, than someone like Elvis Presley. But he's holding this incredible, space age futuristic guitar and just putting all of his sort of energy into these beautiful songs. And it was a huge impact for kids in America, and of course, especially for kids in the UK, and people like, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Eric Clapton, who saw Buddy Holly come over there in 1957 and were just blown away by this vision of the kind of American future that Buddy Holly represented holding his Stratocaster.
Amazing. And what an incredible collision between rock and roll and the electric guitar and television and all this mass media starting to emerge.
Absolutely. It's important to know, too, that, the Stratocaster, I think Buddy Holly kind of gave the Stratocaster its rock and roll context, but the Stratocaster appeared on TV in the United States on a very popular, a very popular show called The Lawrence Welk Show in the hands of a guy named Buddy Merrill. And this was like kind of grown-up music. This was like sort of light classical, light symphony kind of jazz music. And they would have Buddy Merrill, this like whippersnapper kid, play these wild solos on a Stratocaster that were very sort of country western. So the Strat was on TV in a lot of different contexts, but of course we now sort of remember it and think of it and chart its course coming in the rock and roll world.
Sure, yeah. I guess that's one of the big appeals of the Strat too. Like so many significant players of different styles have picked it up and made it their own. You talk about Jimi Hendrix as being one of those players. What was his impact on the Strat, or vice versa, maybe?
Yeah, I think if you were to look at probably Hendrix, he's probably the most defining Stratocaster player of all time. I mean, certainly others will have their pick, and there have been many, many great players who picked up a Strat. But when Hendrix was coming to the fore in the mid to late 60s, the Stratocaster had kind of gone out of fashion. All the Brits and the blues scene in London were playing Les Pauls or trying to switch to Les Pauls if they could find them. And it was kind of a surprise to see someone like Jimi Hendrix, this wild American, wring these really distorted, overblown, passionate kind of sounds out of what had been like seen as sort of something left over from the era of surf rock. Like Buddy Holly was sort of old hat. But Hendrix just like got this incredible fluency out of the Stratocaster, obviously using, a ton of gear in addition to the guitar, right? Because he had the fuzz bass, all that, and the Marshall. But yeah, I think Hendrix really just showed the incredible range and eloquence of sounds that you could pull out of the Stratocaster.
Another really incredible feature of the Strat being in production for 65 years, it seems like no matter who has owned Fender, and there's been a whole history of that, but the Stratocaster has always been in production. You've always been able to go out and buy a new Strat. Ian, Paul, why do you think the Strat has remained such an iconic representation of popular music, and I guess popular culture for that matter as well?
I think it's an incredibly iconic shape. I mean, I think the one thing you have to understand that the whole history of the electric guitar is so much tied up, not just in like how they sound and what they allow the musician to do, but their effect on the audience, and the Stratocaster just looks so striking. It's so different from everything that came before, and it still looks modern even 65 years later. And I think that that's part of why it's managed to survive so well. I mean, I would argue that it's probably the definitive silhouette of an electric guitar, that if you asked an average person to say, what is an electric guitar, they would point to something that looked like a Stratocaster. So I think that's part of the reason for its popular endurance. But with players, I mean, it's that combination of that just like beautiful kind of sexy appearance, and it's so easy to play, it's so comfortable, and you can get so many different sounds out of it. It's just kind of a perfect, easy, but incredibly satisfying instrument.
Steve, welcome back to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much for having us.
My pleasure. When I was thinking of great Strat players in Australia, you were certainly up there. Absolutely. I love your tones on a Strat.
Thank you. That's very flattering.
Do you remember your first encounter, or maybe your first awareness of the Fender Strat?
Yeah, it was actually the first real guitar. Well, actually, the second guitar I bought, where I bought a really cheap one to begin with. But when I got the money, when I got a job, and I started to work, the first thing I bought, it was actually a walnut Strat. It was this thing from I think it was Guitar Factory, but it was in the city. It was in Sussex Street
Oh
or something
yeah, I
like that.
remember that one.
It was
Yeah,
ages ago.
I bought my first amp from there.
Oh, is that right? Well, I used to go at lunchtime. I used to work in Australia Square Tower, and I used to just bolt over at lunchtime and just sort of sit in there and have a look around. And I was just drawn to this walnut, fairly heavy Strat, and it had these black Bartolini pickups in it, and it was just different. But it had the shape, you know what I mean? And so I was already kind of influenced by Jimmy and was listening to, and I'd done my Stevie and listening and you know, I kind of had, for some reason, the feeling that that's what you should look like when you're playing the guitar. You should be holding one of them, you know.
Yeah,
So,
wow.
you know, out of pure ignorance and just feeling alone and just instinct, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that was really the first guitar I bought. Yeah, it certainly held up for a while. Yeah.
Fantastic. Why do you think the Strat is still such an iconic and incredibly relevant guitar, still 65 years on?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, a lot of music that we've actually heard has been played on a Strat, and a lot of the tones that I think we associate with music in general and rock and roll in general and guitar music in general are all basically Strat things. And even when, you know, when guys started putting humbuckers in them and that, they were still holding onto a Strat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got all those brands that just changed the headstock, but they were still guys jumping around with Strats, you know.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I think, you know, because of, you know, from I guess the Shadows to Ingvi and in between, it's you know, Blackmore, Hendrix, Stevie, you know, everyone was. There's such a huge recorded catalogue of Stratocaster music, and I think, you know, subconsciously when you're going for tones, there it is. You know, it's been done, and it's at hand there on a Strat. So that, and of course, there's a great quote by Jimmy Vaughan who says, you can get everything out of Strat. You can make it sound like a jazz box. You can make it sound like a telly. You can make it sound metal. You know, it's all there. It's. I guess it's what you pair it with. You know.
Yeah, awesome. That's awesome. Mate, you've mentioned like a whole heap of legendary Strat players. Is there one or two particular songs that spun your head, like in terms of the tone and the parts or whatever?
Yeah, I think, you know, Stevie's sort of blues tone, because I was interested in that. I've always been interested in that music.
Yeah, sure.
So that was really, it was an exciting sound to hear that in the 80s. And it was just a beautiful, and his just relentless technique and power on the instrument. And it was trio, and it took up so much oral sort of real estate, you know, of the sound, and just that stuff, the out of phase stuff, you know, the cold shot, all that stuff that he does when he plays slow blues like Lenny and things like that. It's all really, really pretty, and yet there's so much depth and body to it, you know, and it's legit, you know. He still played blues on it, so it ticked all those boxes. It just covered all that ground, you know, with a Strat through a couple of I think Vibroluxes or something like that. So and a tube screamer. So it kind of laid it down that, you know, it's all in your hands. That, you know, and this was a great instrument where you could really get a signature sound out of, because it had a huge aural spectrum. So, yeah, I think that was one of the greatest, most appealing sounds. And of course, Hendrix's stuff with the pedals and that kind of stuff. And I think something that people forget about was the string gauges that Jimi Hendrix uses, and I think that is a huge part of the sound that people aren't aware of.
Sure. I'm aware of Stevie using like 13s or whatever. What's the Hendrix recipe? I've never actually pinned that down.
There's, I think the G string's super light and the E string is super light. It's not like a standard 10s. I think they were 9s, and he even went lighter still. There's a guy, RJ Ronquillo, who's a fantastic guitar player, and he does a lot of demos. He's a really hip cat in LA, I think he is, and he's doing. He's done a YouTube article on it, so maybe you should check it out. But it makes such a difference. I haven't done it myself because I don't have the money to be buying extra strings and changing them, and so I just buy a set of 11s. That's
gotcha.
it. But it is an amazing thing, and he makes a huge point. And demonstrates it really clearly. So maybe you should check that out. But I think that, in answer to your question, Stevie and Jimmy, of course, two huge sounds out of the Strat that really appealed to me.
Yeah, hard to beat those guys, man. What's your own Strat collection like these days? And maybe what's the main? Is there a main one that you'll pull out?
Yeah, well, I've got the Rory Strat, the custom shop Rory Gallagher Strat, which nice. I had for about what I played for 10 years, which was my guitar. It's a really fine neck on it, rosewood, and I had to doctor it a bit. I had to put in because it was initially a 3-way switch, so I put in the 5. And there was all this business going on with the machine heads, so I put locking machine heads on it, and changed a few things, changed the bridge, and so it's been modified quite heavily. So that was the main thing. But I've recently, I'm quite ashamed to say, being the Fender endorsee and Fender devotee that I am, I'm a bit embarrassed to say that I've been playing an exotic Strat.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Purely because of the weight of it. It's just so light, and it's just a really beautiful playable guitar. It was funny. I met someone who owns a guitar shop and said, I own, 200 guitars, and this is the only guitar I play. So,
wow.
He kind of recommended it, and it has worked. It's become a really good workhorse, and it's great. I have modified that somewhat to an extent, but it's still, they've got the vintage raw pickups in it, made by Exotic, and it's just a very light, stratty kind of thing. Carl Verheyen does a great talk about Strats and what he looks for in Strats, and just 10s on a Strat, in standard tuning. I'm down a half step, so I use 11s generally, but 10s on, and actually Peter Northcote made a great point today on Facebook saying he had to tune down to E flat this weekend, and he said, I hate it because the electric guitar's not meant to be in E flat. It's meant to be in standard 440, and the strings sound better. The whole instrument sounds better in standard tuning. And I agree. Having played E flat for the last 20 years of my life, it's the guitar is definitely much better sounding instrument in standard tuning. But such is my curse, because I'm a terrible singer, so I'm trying to make up for that with tuning down a half step, hoping no one knows. But so that's still,
I disagree.
Yeah. So that I got a bunch of Strats. I got a left-handed Hendrix Strat, which I used, and I've got a Jap Strat, which was my main guitar for many years, that I bought off Harry Bruce, which I modded a little bit, changed pickups and machine heads and springs and whatnot, which is still a fantastic and beautifully intonated instrument, which is, and it's funny, I pick it up now and again. I keep it in 440 at home to teach with it now and again, and I pick it up and I just think, wow, it's still such a fantastic instrument to play, and it's all there, so. Yeah, so there's a few Strats around here.
Nice.
But I actually had my crush. I saw this a thin line Strat, actually, one with an F hole in it, and I played the Eric Johnson thing at one of the Fender custom shop nights that we did, and that was a fantastic instrument. I think Mossy bought one of those, and it did sound fantastic on its own. But I saw this thing, and it was in this bright lime green sparkle, and it had been aged and relict, and it looked just $1 million. I forgot to breathe when I was looking at it. It was just such a beautiful instrument. So yeah, I might sort of chase something like that down just for a look. But,
nice, man. Excellent. So yeah, there's never too many Strats, obviously.
No, absolutely.
Phil Cebrano, welcome to the Strat Special Edition.
Great to be here.
Excellent. Mate, can you remember the first Strat you saw, or when you first became aware of what a Fender Stratocaster was?
Yeah, well, I guess the first bit of awareness was probably a poster of Jimi Hendrix. But like many others, it sort of confused me a bit because it was upside down.
Of course, yeah.
And then I kind of made the connection with that it was the same guitar as Buddy Holly's, but white and upside down. Yeah. And then being a bit of a stylist of a kid, I kind of was like, Buddy Holly was playing a Strat back in 57 or whatever. And there weren't many other people playing Strats back then. And I was like, oh, what's the connection? I eventually made all the connections later on, but there was something that kind of just, I don't know, something that kind of just twigged in me. And my first electric guitar was a Les Paul copy.
Okay.
An Ibanez Les Paul copy. And then I remember jamming one time with some friends, and the other guy had a Strat, and I asked him if I could play it, and there was just something that kind of went, oh yeah, no, this, I can see what the deal is with these guitars. It just felt really different. It kind of felt easier. And I don't know, the fact that the action to where to the body was lower. I could sort of rest my hand and my fingers on the scratch plate, and there was just something about it. I don't know.
Yeah,
it
cool.
Had something.
Do you remember when you ended up owning your first Strat? Or have you been through a number of Strats? I want to talk about your main one, of course, but
we'll get to that. We'll get to Blondie. Okay, so the next kind of real-ish guitar I got was a Rickenbacker. So I had this Les Paul copy, and then I had a Rickenbacker because I was into kind of the post-punk scene of the late 70s and early 80s. So I was into a band called The Jam, and then that kind of was the whole mod sound and that jangly, sharp, edgy kind of sound on the Rickenbacker. And that got me into 60s music, and then that made me start thinking about bands like the Shadows and that surf music thing. So I formed a punk surf band, and I had a mate of mine's. It was a red Strat, which I was using. It was a Cymar Strat, which is like, Cymar is like a copy of it. It was like the even cheaper version of, I think Ibanez.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
During that whole lawsuit era, blah 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 blah. Anyway, I never ever forget the first time that I played around with the floating tremolo thing, and that idea of getting that wobbly sort of thing on notes and chords, like the Shadows and on all that sort of surf music sound. And then I was like, oh yeah, this is my thing. I think I've found my thing here. Was that tremolo kind of thing. So that was the first sort of Strat style guitar that I had. And then what I used to do, and I'm sure a lot of young people out there do, is they kind of borrow someone's guitar and then they kind of just keep it, and then they sort of eventually own it, and it's kind of just like stealing, really.
It kind of is.
It's kind of like stealing by attrition. You just kind of like, and so the next guitar I did that with was from a mate of mine, Ashley Cadell, and he had a 70s Strat with the three, the bolt neck with the three screws.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And the big headstock.
Yeah, cool.
And I kind of borrowed that, and eventually he eventually chased me up on it and said, "Hey mate, you got to buy that off me." So I ended up buying it off him, and that was the one that started it. The only thing was, even then, I knew kind of that was a nice guitar, but it just didn't have. There was something about it that didn't have, and I don't know what it is. And no matter how many people I speak to about it, with other guitarists and luthiers and people that make guitars, there is a certain something that some guitars have and some guitars don't. So it never really had a thing. So then I bought a 1963 L series from Jackson's in Sydney. And I know that guy's name is kind of mud around town, but back in the day, that shop was kind of like the Mecca.
Yeah, definitely.
And there was it would have been late 80s, and there was this Strat sitting there and looked really legit. It looked like awesome. It had been refinished, but it was a 1963 L series, and I bought it for $2,500.
Wow. Which back then, that's a bit of cash for.
That was still a lot of money back then,
yeah.
And I was doing pretty well with gigs and stuff, and I thought, no, I'm going to get a real guitar. So that's when I marked that in the history books as that was my kind of first major acquisition.
Yeah.
And that guitar had that thing, and I don't know what it was. It just sounded really Stratty. It sounded like, and when you turned it, like if you played it through a big amp, it did all of those awesome things. And the neck pickup was just like, I don't know, it was just instantly sort of Hendrixy.
Yeah.
And Curtis Mayfieldy. It was just great. That sadly I had to sell about, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later, because I needed the bread. But this brings us up to date with the Strat that I eventually kind of like have taken on as my main squeeze.
Now this is the blonde Strat Plus. That's the one I immediately think of when I think of you.
Yeah, that's Blondie.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's funny how sometimes things happen, because that guitar I bought, well, what happened was the 63 L series I was doing a lot of funk gigs and Kate gigs on, and a bit of jazzy sort of soul on, which was great. And then things started to get pretty busy with Kate's pop career, and so we were touring a lot. And I didn't want to take the L series out on the road, so I bought a Strat Plus. Now the first one I bought was in a kind of a shell pink. That colour's actually become a little bit of a rare collector's item now, which I stupidly, after a couple of years, sprayed over with black and then sold that one off. But I bought two around the same time, and the other one was this Arctic White Strat, and that was the second guitar. The pink one I played on all the gigs because it sort of fit in with the times and the look, but it didn't have the vibe. It didn't have that thing. It just didn't play. I don't know. It just didn't feel or sound. I don't know, special. Yeah. Then I started to play the white one because I was a bit more into probably fashion than I was into playing, and the white one could go with different outfits better.
Yeah, gotcha.
And then
that's great, man.
And then and then kind of around that time, late 80s, early 90s, there was a big movement back to sort of the 60s stuff, care of Lenny Kravitz and other people like that. And so I'd always been a bit of a Hendrix guy. So I've gone, okay, well, I've got the guitar ready to go, and that's the white Strat. The Strat Plus is, for the listeners that don't know, it was kind of like American Fender taking ownership back of their brand and their manufacturing and wanting to create some guitars of quality, because the American Strats of the early to mid 80s, to be honest, the Japanese were making better Strats under the Fender brand. That's how I felt anyway.
Sure.
Then when is that a fair call?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So when the Strat Plus came out, we all sort of had a go and went, okay, well, we're going to give them a go because it's got some kind of innovative stuff. It had like a Wilkinson bridge and the roller nut to kind of assist with tuning, and the lace sensor pickups were one of the first sort of experimentations with noise cancelling or noise limiting pickups. A lot of people kind of, I don't know, have a bit of a problem with the lace sensors. I don't really see it. And the pickups that I've got on mine have always been fine for the bridge. For the middle and the neck pickup. Yep. I replaced the bridge pickup with a Seymour Duncan mini humbucker. I think it's called a mini JB.
Oh, okay, cool.
And I had it, for some reason, again, I don't know, I went on this wacky mod thing that I wanted to do, modification thing, where I'd seen one of those Hot Licks videos by Brian May, and he was talking about his Red Special, and he had all this switching on his Red Special where you could, put things in phase and out of phase and in series and out of, all of those kind of controls. So I wanted to get more control over different sounds on my Strat, the white one. So I had a mate of mine, Colin Bloxham, who was a guitar dude that used to set up all my guitars in Sydney.
Oh, yeah. He worked on one of mine, at Glebe, I think he was, when I...
Yeah, fantastic dude. Just a ripper. So I sat down with him and I sort of talked through what I wanted on this Strat, because I wanted to be able to make it as versatile as possible. We tried the treble bleed thing on the L series, and I wasn't that happy with it because I actually didn't mind pulling the volume back and it going a bit muddy.
Okay, yeah, cool.
That was sort of... I kind of used that. Yeah. So we didn't do that on the white one. What we did was we put this mini humbucker in and put a push-pull knob to split it from humbucker to single, so I could still have a single on the bridge. We made the that knob as well. We made that a universal tone knob for all the three pickups, and the middle pickup we made it a wind-in knob for the neck pickup, so that when I had the bridge pickup on, I could wind the neck pickup in out of phase, so it would get that kind of Telecaster quacky sound.
Oh, awesome.
And then we've entered into a world of geekdom, but I suppose this is what this is all about.
This is the right place for it, Phil.
This is the right place, yeah. So then when you did switch it to the out of phase position between the bridge and the middle, and you've wound in the neck pickup, you've got all the pickups on at once. And I wanted to see what that sounded like. And it actually sounds fantastic, because it gives you it gives you a really, really wide range of choices.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes on the fly, on gigs, you're looking for something that's just going to cut through. And on its own, it may not sound amazing, but within, like in the band, in the kind of like the aural spectrum of the band, it actually fits really well, like a part that will jump out. I ended up quite a few years later actually buying one of those red special Brian May guitars, and a lot of those sounds on that guitar are unusable on their own, but
mm-hmm.
within a track, or going through a Vox AC30 with a treble booster, it's absolutely amazing, right?
Wow.
So it's kind of like a disadvantage working as your advantage,
mm-hmm.
like a thin tone boosted the right kind of way can bring out harmonics that you wouldn't normally get from maybe a more high-end EMG pickup or something like that. Anyway,
right.
that's
cool.
my take on it. I'm not really very technical with that stuff, but that's the mod that I had done on that Strat, and that's stuck with me ever since.
Fantastic.
A lot of people have commented on my tone, and I'm going, geez, I don't know what I'm really doing. And I think it's got a lot to do with that guitar and how it's been modified. I really got to say the Seymour Duncan mini humbucker, that's a cool humbucker. It's a really great pickup, and it's served me really well on that guitar. What else do you want to know about it? I got rid of the big roller nut and replaced it with the smaller one.
Oh, okay, yeah. The one that fits more in like a normal nut space, I guess. Is that?
Yeah, and
right.
I had James Cargill, instead of putting in that dodgy plastic bit that they give you from Fender, because that just looks naff, I got him to kind of create he put a nice little bit of birch in there to make it look like it's sort of like it looks a little bit more like it's at home.
Oh, very cool, very cool.
And the only things that I've changed on it since is that because I use the whammy bar a lot, the original bridge kind of wore down a bit at the pins,
mm-hmm.
so I've replaced that, and I put on some new tuning pegs as well. But apart from that, it's just been, going a treat. I put on a new scratch plate, like a gold anodized gold scratch plate, because I was doing a thing a few years back with a mate. At the end of the song, we're rubbing our guitars together, and his string got caught underneath my scratch plate and cracked the end off it. So,
okay.
Yeah, so that was that. But
awesome, man.
Yeah,
and
there's the story.
Strat.
I know it's very waffly, but
it's a great story, man. It's a great Strat story.
There's one kind of bit to add on the end, and this is something I've never really told in public, and that is that about 10 years ago, the year of this Strat that I've got is in 1989, so that makes it 30 years old now,
yeah,
right?
30 years this year, yeah, cool.
Far out. So about 10 years ago on eBay, I saw a 1989 Strat, a white one, with a. It was really odd. It also had a Seymour Duncan humbucker on it, and it was in mint condition. And I said to myself, I'm going to kick myself if I don't buy this, right? And it's still sitting in a cupboard at home in mint condition. And it's going to be like the before and after shot.
That's great.
Because my Strat's all worn down, and I get these people suspiciously saying, "Oh yeah, is that a relic?"
Yeah.
Is it? And I go, no, I'm the relic. The guitar's just been worn away from years and years and years of me playing, but I can see why you might think it's that. I like the idea of relicking, but I don't like the idea of thinking that you can buy mojo.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think you have to play mojo into something. I'm not going to say that I've never relicked a guitar. Like some guitars you get are just so spanky and new, and the lacquer's all shiny, and you don't feel like you can bang it around. So there's a guy in South Melbourne that I'll take my guitars to just get him to kind of like age it a little, so that I don't feel like I'm, taking a new car out for a spin.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as that wearing down stuff and wearing down the fingerboard and that kind of thing, I don't really get it. But that's just me.
Yeah, there you go. Well, mate, it's all legit on Blondie. That's very cool.
Yeah, that's the Blondie story. Look, it's my workhorse guitar, and it's good to have a guitar that you can kind of just bang about.
Yeah.
If by chance it has the mojo and it actually has all the sounds that you want and can do all the things that you want it to do, then that's just a fantastic bonus,
Yeah.
I've got other guitars, I've got more expensive guitars. I've got guitars that are more collectible, but that's the one that really works for me, and it works across most styles. So, if you can find something like that, stick to it.
All right, there you go. Now, to accompany this episode, I need to let you know a couple of things. We have a Spotify playlist drawn from some of the artists that our guest today spoke of. Also, some suggestions from our Guitar Speak forum members. Thank you, guys. Those players are on there as well. You can check out the Guitar Speak forum on Facebook, by the way. Ian S. Port will be joining us for an upcoming episode to talk about his book In Full, which is a fantastic story. Phil and Steve have both been prior guests on the Guitar Speak podcast, and they speak in more depth about their career as well. So I'll leave some links for that in the show notes. It's well worth checking out. All right, thank you so much for joining me. This is Matt Wakeling from the Guitar Speak podcast saying bye for now. Long live the Strat!